what people say. Ooh, that's what people say. Ooh, I can't make them stay. That's what people say.
That's what people say.
Moving. It's like I got this music. Even I'm not saying it's gonna be
alright.
Gonna play.
Play. I don't know the words.
Hi, Malorie.
Darius, you're so fun.
I try. Welcome to the Greatness Machine.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Man, I am so freaking pumped. Guys, welcome to the Greatness Machine. I'm your host, Darius Mirshahzadeh, and boy, do we have a special guest today. We got my main lady, Malorie Nicole. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much.
Oh my gosh. Guys, as you know, the Greatness Machine, we're about two things: people who are living their passions and those who are creating greatness in the world. And Malorie is neither short of passion or greatness. So we're going to be jumping into the show in just a second. But before we go there, do you mind if I give a little bit of background on how we met?
Absolutely.
So I don't remember what room it was in, but I just released a podcast on my like amazement at this new app called Clubhouse, which I'm less enamored with now than when I actually shot the show. But we met in a room on Clubhouse, and I'm trying to remember, was it Jeff Spencer and Nick?
Yes, I believe so. And we were just vibing something. I don't even remember what it was that we were talking about, but we were like, both said pretty much at the same time, hey, we need to talk.
Yeah. I'm like, hey, I got to connect with this girl. And she's like, I got to connect with this guy. So we connected, and I actually did your podcast, which is a badass podcast. So that was super cool. And then, and now here you are on my show. So welcome to the show.
And it's a blast. I love your energy. I'm excited about this today.
I try. So now I'm going to give you a formal bio. Is that cool?
Cool. Yes.
All right. I always like to give like the origin story, and then I give the formal. So guys, Malorie has spent years dedicated to understanding the science, behavior, habit, performance, and healing. She's been featured in numerous media platforms, many top-rated podcasts offering audiences a unique understanding of the power of the mind, how to show you to become the most powerful version of yourself. She believes the best companies, business owners, and leaders are fully committed to their own personal development and growth. I don't have the name of like your gig. I know you have, I don't know what's not in your bio for some reason, but do you mind giving the audience like the background on like what the name of your gigs are? Because you have, I know, business and coaching, and you have a podcast as well.
Yeah. So the podcast is Abundantly Clear Podcast. And then the website is abundantlyclearpodcast.com. But that really just takes you to what I basically do is one-on-one coaching, group coaching, workshops, all of the above that have to do with all the things that you just shared. Mindset, performance, all of that.
So I mean, I'm doing some advising. I reluctantly, whenever I tell my friends who know me that I'm coaching, they're like, yeah, you're not really coaching. You're doing management consulting. So I do think there's a difference between the two. And I think there's an element of coaching in what I do. But and I know how I became a coach, which is a fucking crazy story. But how does one become Malorie in the abundantly amazing coaching business world?
In 2014, I got really sick and had a period of about 3 months where I basically felt like I had the flu. And it was like every single day it was not going away. I was working for an engineering firm at the time, so I was living a completely different life. And I was trying to figure out what was going on with my body because things were getting worse. I was going to the doctor. No one was giving me answers. And it was just this weird whirlwind of a time period. I don't know if you've ever dealt with health issues, but if you're a listener of the show, you know when you're dealing with health issues, it can be kind of scary. And especially when you don't actually have clarity to what's going on. Mm-hmm. But that really looking back, like that was a really hard point in life. But what that did was actually start to inspire me to learn about health and wellness, which was the gateway to behavior and habits and further coaching certifications and just wanting to understand, okay, how do we really behave and why do we behave the way that we do? So it all started with that kind of health bomb that threw up in my life that really changed the trajectory of where I was going in my career path.
Yeah. I have a friend who, I mean, I've had a couple little health things, some bigger than others, but he said, a healthy man has many desires. A sick man only has one. Right.
Exactly.
Right. Which is interesting, because when you're in it, you're like, nothing else matters, right? This is like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs conversation, which is, when you're in survival mode, you're like, yeah, fuck success. Like I'm not like worried about like how high my podcast is ranking, like when I'm in bed in pain.
Right. Exactly. All you want to do is like make sure that you can function without it being super, super difficult to get through the day. That's all you can focus on when you're in that state.
Totally. I had, and you don't need to go into what your health issue was, but I had, so I'm 42 years old. And when I was 38, I was like in the middle of running a strategic at my company, and I had this like side pain. And I was like, and I thought I'd like strained an abdominal muscle. So I go to the doctor, and they're like, no, nothing, everything's good here. And it was like in the middle of this strategic. Like, so I have all my managers flown in, and this is like 1,000-person company at this point. So it's like, it's a big deal for me to be running this thing. And I go home that night, and I'm like, oh, I guess I just like strained my ab working out or something. And then I go back the next day. I go to bed. I feel like a little lousy. I wake up. I'm like, all right, I feel a little better. I go to the strategic, and dude, I went from like okay to like high fever and like not good in like 6 hours. No. Actually, I think I ran the whole strategic, but I left early the second day. I go home, I go to bed, high fever. Now, let me rewind. I'm gonna tell you, like when I was 17, the exact same thing happened to me. I popped the bursa sac in my knee, and I got staph infection in it.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like laying in my bed with like 8 covers on me and like freezing. And then I went, and they had to like lance my knee, and I was out of high school for a month, and it was like a big deal. I almost died. And so the same thing happens again when I'm 38, but like my knee was like big because it was like swollen or whatever. There's no swollen anything. I go to the emergency room. I basically had an infection in my body, and I had diverticulitis that had burst. Now, diverticulitis is like it's like a inflammation of your colon, essentially, because you have these diverticuli. I know this is gross, but I'm there. And first of all,
listeners, we're getting through the colon part.
Yeah. So first of all, like the average age of a person that gets diverticulitis is like 80. So I'm like the youngest human in the world that has it. And it fucked me up. I was sick for like months, and like really, really sick for like a month. And then I had this like chronic pain for like 3 years. And like to your point, like when you're dealing with that shit, it makes you like, you're like, dude, this is fucked up, So anyway, that's
I don't know what you believe about this, but this is one of the reasons I love talking to you, because I think we both are just like, oh, whatever. We can believe different things, and we can jam, and we can learn. And that's one of the reasons I just love you as a person. Looking back now, I'm like, oh, that health stuff was totally trying to tell me that I needed to shift, or something needed to change in my life, or like I'm not on the right path. And it was a stress buildup that was happening that kind of, externally manifested itself.
No, I actually agree with that. No, I fully agree with that. I had a ton of other health problems that like we don't need to get into, because this is about you, not me. But yeah, I totally agree. I think that your physical health is a manifest. There's obviously examples of this that are maybe less clear, right? If you have cancer or something when you're 20, like that's probably not stress related, right? But that's more genetic related. But to your point, I do believe that your physical health is a manifestation of your overall health, right? And that's so for you, that caused a massive change, I'm assuming, and then you started studying the coaching. And how do you go, like, a lot of people, what were you doing, by the way, for the engineering firm?
So I was working for the construction administration, civil engineering, landscape architecture department. And I really worked like in a man's world. Like I was very much like in a like all men team, working with all men clients. Like it's weird looking back on it now to see like what I came from. Because I went to school for water quality and geospatial technology. And the firm that I ended up working for was a really great firm, but I was like I was on the construction site. Like that was a normal everyday thing for me.
What where'd you go to school? Where'd you study the water conservation?
I went to UNC Wilmington.
Oh, cool. Okay, yeah, that's right. You're from the Carolinas, and
Yeah.
So you're going to school. Is that like an engineering degree, or is that like more of like an environmental science type of degree?
Yeah, the latter.
Okay, so you studied in the environmental science. You get into this like construction engineering type firm. Mm-hmm. By the way, it's funny when you start saying stuff like that, we're like, why is it that construction? I see this in like computer science too, where you're like, why is it all dudes?
I know,
like,
right?
Does it make sense? So, like 50% of the population is female. Like I can't understand that women are like, I don't like construction. Like that doesn't make sense to me. But it does.
In a bad way. Like I actually really liked my job. So I'm not one of those entrepreneurs that was like, I hated my life and I needed to start a business. And then this was like a revolt against society. This was very much just my natural progression and next step. I actually had a really good job.
That's so you're like doing the job. What do you think it was that like obviously you like your job, you have this health issue or scare, and then you're like, new world me. Like how does that I mean I don't fully understand that. Help me out there.
I know. Looking back, I don't fully understand it either because it was very intuitive. And it was like the deeper and deeper I started going into the human behavior part of the work, it was all encompassing. I could not stop thinking about it. So what I actually did, because there's a little bit of a bridge here, I started a health coaching business. Like on the side, I was like, okay, I'm super passionate about health and wellness now. This has like totally opened up my eyes. And it seemed like everybody that I knew in my inner circle, I was having all these conversations and they were also beginning to share things with me about health and wellness that they didn't understand. Because this was a little bit before health consciousness, the way that it is now. Like there's more, it's talked about more than it was even 5-6 years ago.
Totally.
So at the time I was like, okay, I'm just going to start a side business and see what happens. So I started using my Facebook as a platform and I was doing Facebook Lives and I was posting about health and wellness and I started getting clients and it happened really, really, really quickly. And when I began working with clients in health and wellness, something about my messaging started to shift. I don't even really know what it was, but there was a week period where I had all of these business owners that signed up on my calendar to work with me about mindset. I wasn't promoting mindset consciously, but apparently I was promoting mindset because of the things that I was saying in my marketing and in my messaging that I wasn't even realizing that I was doing.
So could you give me an example?
Yeah. So I started talking about things like how we make decisions often from a place of stress and overwhelm. When we don't realize we're doing this, what we're actually doing is creating more chaos in our day-to-day business and teams and lives than we need to be because we're constantly in a state of fight or flight. So I would start talking about things like this that had to do with health, that had to do with stress, but it was speaking to a different type of person that didn't necessarily want to get on the phone with me and talk about, meals and nutrition and how to exercise, but they wanted to talk to me about like, how do I start thinking from a more clear state? How do I start believing in myself differently? How do I actually make this shift?
So wait, how old were you when this happened?
So my business is 4 years old. I'm 31. So okay. Yeah. I'm coming at you from like a. No, you're great. It's weird. I'm really like I the math with years and like when it all happened because it almost feels like I have a completely different life.
So you're 27. You're 27. So the reason I asked that is like I'm Gen X, so you're millennial, and I'm like, yeah, what the fuck do you know, millennial? You're 27. How are you going to coach me on my mindset?
Yeah, I also felt that way. I literally felt that way during that week. I was looking at my calendar and I'm like, I just started this health business. I'm into my second certification because I wanted to continue learning. Like some people, we're just different in that aspect. All of us are just different. For me, like I like learning. I like taking courses. I like investing in the next thing. Like it doesn't bother me. Some people are like, nah, you don't need to keep doing that to coach. It's whatever. I don't think there's a right or wrong in that. but I wanted to learn about mindset and human behavior and habit change and trauma and all of these different things. And when I looked at my calendar that week, because it came out of nowhere, it happened like overnight that the business started to take a shift.
Right.
And I looked at my calendar and I'm like, what in the world? Who am I to be doing this? So like all of my own self-doubt and fear and what if and can you started to show up as well. So this was a totally like I had to get out of my own way also in this.
Mm-hmm. I do think that if you, I think some of it comes through life experience, right? And life experience shows up in many different forms for different people, depending on, their life, obviously. Some people it's later, some people it's earlier. But I do think that's probably smart that you got that professional certification at that time. Because again, I always look at, I hear this a lot from CEOs. They're like in their early 20s and they're like, talking about being a CEO and they have a business and they're talking scale and they're using a lot of the right buzzwords, but I'm like, you literally have no experience. Like you have a very minimal experience. You're early in your career, right? And so the experience they have is what they've had at that moment. And I do think that there's something to be said around getting that training because then there is a gap, a contrast between who you're helping and yourself. You don't have 20 years experience doing the coaching, but you have an actual methodology by which you can assess and make recommendations or help at least understand what you're working with. What type of coaching was this? Or a certification? Was this like somatic work?
A little bit. The somatic stuff came up a little bit later. This was just a mastery and coaching certification, but it really tied in the belief system and how our traumas affect our thoughts. And to your point to that, I think you're backtracking just a second because you said something really important. A lot of times we are scared to just own where we're at. And sometimes we're at the beginning and that's okay. And a lot of times through transitional periods in our life, we're going to be at the beginning over and over and over again as we're like continuing to excel and learn and grow. And I think we have like our ego likes to get in the way of that and say these things to ourselves of, that we have to be further along or that it's not okay that we are at the beginning or it's not okay that your business is 4 or 5 years old or your business is 1 month old or whatever it may be. And like, what's wrong with just owning exactly where you're at?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think it's where people fake it till they make it. And
exactly.
and especially in entrepreneurism, especially in building businesses.
It happens all the time in entrepreneurship.
So much fakery, right? And so I'm on kind of the other side of it now. I've been an entrepreneur for 20 years.
Right.
I want to, like, my whole thing is about being, to your point, owning where you're at, being vulnerable as to where you're at and like owning that. Like when I was 27 years old, I had a business with 150 employees. Like,
right.
You don't do that because you know how to run a business with 150 employees when you're 27, or maybe I was 28 when I had that many employees. But the point being is like, I just said, fuck it. I'm just going to go do it. And I'll let the trial by fire teach me. And it taught me a lot. I mean, I realized, I didn't know what I was doing. And then I went and I kind of did what you did. I went and started looking for resources and learnings. And I got into a 3-year entrepreneurship program that was like drinking from a fire hose. Mm-hmm. So I agree with you. I think that for me, where I sometimes give people shit, or I don't like when people are trying to pretend like there's something more than they are. Like, oh,
you see right through it.
Yeah, especially again, like if I was on Clubhouse and this woman was on there literally crying about her son who had died, and she was in her 50s, and there's obviously a major trauma around losing a child, mm-hmm. which having now had children, I cannot imagine what that I don't know what that feels like, and I don't want to ever know what it feels like. Right. And so I was on there, this woman's on there, they're kind of hard coaching her a little bit, but there's obviously a sympathy around the fact that like nobody knows what she's going through, but there's some trauma that she needs to deal with, right? And there's trauma that she needs to learn how to manage with because it's interfering with her ability to do what she wants to do outside of this trauma, right?
Absolutely.
And I've done about 15 months of somatic experience coaching and therapy. So like I know way more about it now than I did before about dealing with one's trauma. And so this girl who 21 years old is like on the stage, starts fucking coaching this woman. And she's like, doesn't have any, like she's just like giving her stupid opinion. Right. And I was like shut the fuck up. Like that's what was blaring across my head. It was just like, there's a time and place. Like this woman did not come to this girl for coaching. She was just giving her stupid opinion. So for me, like it's stuff like that where I'm like, hey, listen, like don't do that. Like that's
coaching
not cool.
Yeah, coaching is extremely personal. And I think something that you're talking about is like the ethics of coaching, because there's the ethics of business, but there's also the ethics of being in someone's mental space. And I don't believe that it's talked about enough that people really have something in their business, a person in their business, to where they are making sure they're staying in integrity and, you know, continuing to build and grow that muscle, and that they're not, I don't want to say making things worse, but that they're being effective in how they're actually showing up to work with someone in their emotional states and, you know, their mental processes. I mean, that's a huge, huge important thing.
Yeah. In conscious leadership, there's a whole idea around meeting people where they're at, right? And knower versus learner mentality and all these different, you know, perspectives around approaching. And I do believe that, you know, my approach to this type of stuff is just from a leadership standpoint, which, and I do believe that as a coach, you are a leader to another leader, right? You're leading a leader essentially. And some of it might be more, if you're a trained therapist, there's a therapeutic aspect to it. But if you're simply coaching, you're helping people to facilitate an outcome essentially, right? And so this idea, I think what you're talking about is meeting people where they're at, you know, and that's not about like abusing them to a certain point or pushing them beyond their limits, unless that's really what they need. And sometimes they do want that and are asking for that. But that's interesting, the perspective around the integrity of coaching, because I do think that it's kind of like it's totally, there's no regulation around this. Right?
No, there isn't. This is why I still work with someone, because I think it's really important to know and have another set of eyes and say like, well, hey, are you checking this? Are you seeing this? Because a lot of where we cross the line of ethics and coaching is we make the client more about us than we do about where they have the potential to go and how we can show up for them. So their results, your own expectation about where your client should go becomes more important to you. And you don't even realize you're doing it. But what you actually do when you do that is you're no longer coaching, you're pushing. And you're potentially, I would use the word abuse because it happens in the coaching industry. You're pushing them in a way that's not actually healthy. And you're kind of bulldozing where they have the potential to go.
Yeah. So there's a group called Entrepreneurial Organization. It's a global organization. Yeah. Are you familiar with EO?
Yeah.
So in EO, we get put in these peer-to-peer groups that are all CEO entrepreneur groups. And for those listeners that don't know what EO is, it's a global organization. I think there's 13,000 members, and you have to have a business 1 million or more. Average size business about 5 million. So I got into it in 2006. It was part of me like being 28 and not knowing shit, right? I mean, like, man, I really want to learn how to be a better CEO. And we get put in these groups. So the reason I bring it up is kind of what you're talking about. The first thing we are taught, it's peer-to-peer. So there's no moderation, there's no coaching from above. It's everyone's shoulder to shoulder, right. like peer-to-peer, right? Is this idea of Gestalt, which is I do not give advice. I only it's heavily, heavily pushed, which is we do not give advice. We only do experience share. And then we allow the folks who are listening to take what they want from the experience share. And the learning that I had may or may not apply in the same way in which the listener's hearing it. So what are your thoughts around that from the standpoint of coaching? Is there an element of experience sharing that you give or that you teach, or is it more around just facilitating or help distilling down the core issues that they're like confronted with?
That's a great question. It's the latter primarily, because that's really what I'm there to do. But I have a long history of trauma in my own life. So it's really hard sometimes not to say like, hey, I get it. Like I've been there. I understand this current thing that you might be experiencing. But I think what's important, to answer your question fully, I think what's important is for me to not assume that I know what's best for them, right? Because a lot of the people that I'm working with they're way further in business than I am. They have developed companies. It didn't start like this. It wasn't like at the very beginning, going back in the timeline that I started talking on Facebook and all of a sudden executives are showing up on my calendar. It was like very small business owners and people that were in my network. And that's changed over time. I help people in lots of different areas, but taking the ego out of it, and not assuming that I can give consulting advice on something that I cannot give consulting advice on. Because at the end of the day, for me, it's all about removing the mental barriers. And then there's a people element as well. A lot of times I see business owners, and I don't know if you may have experienced this, or you can, share some insight on this. Developing team is something that can be really, really challenging, because as the CEO, you pretty much know what needs to happen next. You know the vision, you know where the business is going, but getting the team to go along with you and developing them to also move forward can be really challenging. So something that I've noticed that's shifting in my coaching now is helping people actually coach their team versus just telling them what to do, because we all know, like, we're all basically children. If you just tell me what to do, I'm probably not going to do it. But if you coach someone into their next potential and into that development, it can be a lot more effective. But I really try and stay in my lane, and I don't go outside of like what I know that I can do with that person. A lot of the people that I work with, they have other consultants and mentors, and I'm not there to be just the only person that they ever learn and work with.
Yeah, that's interesting. And then I think that's to your point, it's high integrity, right? Like, what you know, and you're there to do a specific job, staying in your swim lane, to your point. Yeah, I think that what you're touching on, though, around the coaching is, it's some people are better at it than others, right? Especially if there's, you have these, like, I'm a big subscriber to Strength Finder, which is Gallup's tool for engagement, right? And so some people have high relationship, high influence. They understand the concept of not telling people what to do, but getting, to your point, distilling what the issue is, and then not being a knower, being a learner, asking inquisitive questions, helping them learn how to do that. Because what are we really talking about here is leadership is around elevating people to their highest potential, right?
Absolutely.
And so you cannot push people to their highest potential necessarily unless they want to go there.
Right.
Which is probably the fine line between abusing someone to get a result versus getting them to land there themselves, right?
Yes, exactly.
So what I found was different strokes for different folks. That you have, I think over, if you go back to the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution, the command and control type of environments, and this whole idea around top-down management is more of a with the stick, push people, kind of smack them to get them there. And what's happening now is we're seeing that there's a gap around engagement and performance, right? And I can push you to a point, and sometimes people need to be pushed. Sometimes they need tough love, but at the same time, that's a short-term fix to a longer-term outcome, right?
Right.
And you're not going to get them there unless they get there themselves, because they have to develop those skills. So I do think there's a big element of being a teacher, and some people have the skill set to teach how to be a teacher, and some people have the capacity to learn how to be a teacher. Probably everyone does to a certain degree.
Right.
Others are going to have more of that natural skill around it, right? So that you start to look at, neurolinguistic programming and conscious leadership, and you yourself have to become a better leader in order for others to become a better leader. You know what I mean?
I completely agree. And I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions is just, everyone else needs to become a better leader. And leaders actually remove themselves from how it actually has the potential to elevate. But I think there's a huge shift in that right now. I mean, conscious leadership, as you're talking about, like, everyone's kind of talking about it, and we're starting to think about it differently.
Yeah, I to your point, it's been around for a long time, but it's now kind of hit that. What do you call it?
Not taboo.
Yeah, it's not taboo. It's, if you look at the law of the bell-shaped curve law of distribution of information, it's kind of at that early adopter stage, right? Early majority, maybe on the tip of that. So you're out of the early adopter. You're out of that 15.5%. It's now coming into mainstream. And so I do believe it. And this is actually, you're kind of going into a direction that I'm talking about a lot right now, and you just got a copy of my book.
Yes, I
You
did.
want to show it off? Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Can't wait to read it.
Will you show the unboxing material? For those viewers who are watching, you got to check this out.
The branding, I told you that I opened it and then I repackaged it because I'm like, this is so good. Like, look at this branding.
I love it.
The box, oops, it's upside down.
Open it up and show them the inside, because that's my favorite part.
All right, here we go. La la, the release. You even have like a really good rubber band, which I like. Like, nothing about this is lacking quality. You went above and beyond. So we've got this. You have your little bookmark or just like placeholder thing. I like to keep these things around the house. We've got, I purposefully left the sticker because I wanted to know. This is one I haven't looked at yet.
Oh, you got to see it. You got to see it.
Oh, look at that. Okay.
Is there a picture in there or no? Did we run out?
Oh yeah, nope. There is a picture. There's a picture.
Amazing. I give instructions on what to do with it.
So good. I am so excited.
Well, I'm glad you like it, and I'll be even happier to talk to you after you read my book. So the thing I talk about in my book is that, you know, the language of accountability stems from, my belief is, at least, and from my learnings, is that the language of accountability, both in your professional life, personal life, is around values, right? Yeah. And you have an opportunity to design your values to be scalable, to be used as a decision-making tool, to stay true to the outcomes you want. And what I've been telling a lot of people is, I believe that as technology is a very deflationary tool, right? Which basically is a word for it commoditizes everything, right? It makes things consistent. It removes inefficiencies out of the systems that we live and work within. And essentially it's a commoditization system, right? That's what technology does. It makes everything look the same, and then it makes it all the same across the board. And so that like, for instance, if I was doing, you know, pizza delivery in the 80s, oh my God, you could, you know, which you're a little younger than me, like, you may not remember, Domino's had a thing where it's like 30 minutes or less or it's free. Did you know that?
I remember that. Yeah, but I think they brought it back. I think they did it twice.
They might, yeah. They I think they got rid of it and then brought it back. But the point was, that was their like point of constraint that they're making money off of. Like, their pizza versus Pizza Hut's pizza were like the same, right? There's not a huge difference in taste. One's like more greasy, I guess. But the point being is, like, that's a good example of mass marketed pizza that essentially the food quality is pretty dissimilar, right? Like, right. Pretty similar. So now you got to look for these other differentiating value props to like create a reason for people to do business with you. What I believe is through, we have such an infiltration of technology all throughout business with the internet and apps and blockchain and all these automated tools, you know, that what's happening now is, I believe the great differentiator will be what we're talking about, which is leadership. So the way I can have a better business than you isn't through technology, and it's not through price. It's going to be through elevating people to be engaged. And what I've been telling people is, I believe that core values is the way you get them there, is by making that the language of our lives and organizations, because it's such a strong accountability tool, and it creates, I call it visible scale, natural alignment, organic alignment, and that creates more productivity. That productivity differential is essentially what will make one guy win versus another, one girl win versus another, when you look at all things being equal. What are your thoughts on that? I
love the way that you talk about values. So from everything that you just said, but also knowing that we've spent time in depth into talking about your perception of values and what it does for a company and what it has the potential to do. Like, I think that you explain it in a way that not many other people do.
I appreciate that. It came through like doing it every which way wrong until it worked. For some reason, it resonated with me, and I just kept like digging into it. How do you use values in your coaching work at all?
Well, I think 100%, because how are we coaching if we don't actually know why we're doing what we're doing? So there's kind of two parts of it. It's one, what's under the subconscious? What are the default behaviors that you're not aware of, that you're lacking complete awareness to? Oh, I'm doing these things. This is a pattern that exists in my life, and I'm totally blind to it. But then the other part of it is like going deeper into the value system of when we clear out the noise of those default behaviors that are not serving you, that are not creating productivity and performance, we need to look at what you want and why you're making the decisions that you're making. And a lot of times it's really simple. People feel unaligned, or they feel stressed or overwhelmed, or they're not where they want to be in their business or in their life because they don't actually know what it is that they want. And I don't mean like they want the $1 million house and they want to have 4 children. I mean, like why they make the decisions they make, the framework behind this is who I am, this is my identity, this is what I want to create. There's a huge gap there. They're not really aware of any of those things. So I think if you're coaching someone, if you're not talking about values, if you're not helping someone connect those dots, I'm not saying that you're doing it wrong, but there's a potential that you could be enhancing the transformation someone experiences with you if you maybe go there.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. I mean, I actually don't know. Like, I eat my own dog food. So I'm such a proponent. Like, for me, it's the go-to for everything, which is getting clear on your values. What do they look like in your life? And then making every decision based off of them. And I think, like, from my experience, is that when we're not doing that and things come up, like intuitively, your values, right? Mm-hmm. Whether you've intentionally distilled them into precisely what they are and how they show up and how you want them to be, from a a little bit aspirational, but not like to the point where it's like, oh, my number one value is proactiveness, and you're like the least proactive person on earth, right? Like, you don't want to lie to yourself because there has to be an authenticity around it. But from my perspective, it's the ultimate decision-making tool. And I think that's where there's value in people getting clear on it, and then just it becomes a binary decision. You're either making a decision in your values or out of your values. And I think, like, at least from my experience, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, what I found, and I have a friend who I interviewed earlier this year, Bob Glazer, who wrote the book.
Oh, yeah.
You know Bob?
Wait.
He wrote Elevate. He has the Elevate podcast.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, he and I are in my MIT program together, and so he and I can't remember the book. I think Elevate was the book that did really well. I think it was too. So he and I were talking about this, and he's like, "Look, like, I see values as kind of like a tunnel that you're driving through, and you're going against your values when the car starts hitting the side of the tunnel, and there's sparks flying, and you feel that friction." Right. And I thought that was for me, that was a great visual. I actually have a tunnel I'm thinking of in San Francisco that I used to drive through all the time. But it, like, when you hit it, you feel it, right? It feels off. And I think it comes in the form of neurotic behavior, anxiety, maybe some forms of depression, which are probably related to anxiety. And so how do you see values come up in your life and in your practice as a coach, like in this way?
Yeah, of course. So I think for people that are having a hard time going down that tunnel without hitting the walls and creating that friction and like you're saying, like creating resistance in their life, a lot of the times what's actually happening is you're just on default with your subconscious belief system and you don't even realize it. So you consciously see what you want. Like, I want my life to be this way. I want to be a good business leader. I want to have, this experience and that experience. But everything that I'm doing, because this is something I've heard from a lot of people, it's like, I know what I want, but every decision I make is not lining up to that. And I have no idea why I'm sabotaging myself.
Interesting.
And most of that just comes from unresolved trauma, unresolved thought processes. So you see your values, but you're basically hitting the wall before you even have the opportunity to go down the tunnel, because your default is, nope, we got to go this way. Nope, we got to go this way, because of that old belief system in things that you haven't even looked at that are contributing to the decisions you're making every single day in business.
Yeah, it's funny what you just said. So I had this realization, I don't know, a year ago, where I was like, I can't remember what it's funny. Like, my brain's funny. My brain, like, throws away the garbage quick. Like, it cleans out the RAM really quickly when I
awesome gift.
Yeah, I do have an interesting brain in that sense, and because I had I had a lot of trauma when I grew up as well, like in kind of gnarly stuff, but I have like instant wiping of the hard drive, and so I'm like, oh, I don't. The fact that I can't remember this right now is funny because it was like this massive epiphany, which was I realized that I was and I have a really strong values around being like honest and to a fault, right? Where I will say things because I can't even exaggerate a little bit, right? Like it bothers me to exaggerate. So I'm like very precise, and there's a integrity around precision and authenticity and these things that are some of my strengths. So that's outward Darius. Inward Darius, I was full blown fucking. I had made this big lie to myself. I was lying to myself like a compulsive liar about this. I can't believe I'm forgetting it right now. But the point being is that I think that we can be the biggest liars to ourselves. To your point, to create these limiting beliefs, right? That we just straight up lie to ourselves and convince ourselves of these lies, and then we're like, "That's the truth," and you're like one of the lies I don't think this is the one that the big epiphany was. I had lied to myself that I was just naturally a worrisome, anxious person. Like that's how I convinced myself that, oh no, that's just who you've always been. And I didn't realize, no, dude, no human being is a naturally like anxious person. Like that's
I did the same thing. I told myself that same exact lie. Like I'm totally with you right now on that. I'm like, yeah, I've been there. So me.
I was 9 when I told myself that lie. I remember the moment I told myself that lie. I was in 4th grade because and the funny thing was my grandmother was kind of a worrywart. She was a naturally anxious person, right? Because she had trauma and shit that she had never dealt with. And so I watched her be worrisome. And then I just was, there's 2 things I learned now. I'm high sensing, right? So my neurology, is super high sensing. I'm a very sensitive, like I just have a high sensing neurology, right? Like I'm a sensitive person. So, and 20% of the population has that, right? And so if you have that and you are in trauma and you are a person that's like overly carrying, like that's a nice recipe to like be anxious,
100%. 100%. And that happens all the time. I love that you just laid it out the way that you did, because a lot of it is, okay, when you clear out the stuff, then you can look at, now I have these gifts. I am sensitive. I am highly energized. I wake up and I don't want to stop. And I have all of this like energy inside of me to do and to create. How can I use it? And that's where so many people get stuck, is because they feel like broken or wrong, or they feel like they're not doing what they should be doing because their default patterns aren't serving them. But then once you clear that, it's like they can see themselves for the first time with this new sense of identity and go, oh my gosh, these are actually gifts that I haven't even seen.
Yeah, and I do think, to your point, there's a clearing that needs to happen, because for me, it was like, oh my God, I've been lying to myself about this. And that's not really like why I'm doing what and again, this wasn't it's killing me. I can't remember the lie right now that I was telling myself, because I was like, dude, you're the biggest fucking liar in the world yourself.
But isn't that brilliant? You've disassociated yourself from it so much that you don't even remember what it was. That's what I love about this work. Like, that's how disconnected we become from these limiting beliefs. Like, we don't even remember what they are after we've released them.
Oh yeah. Well, I've had a very tumultuous business life. And so it's funny, one of the realizations I've had, to your point just now, is I remember being in the moment and being like massively anxious about something, like where I was like losing sleep. And 5 years later, I couldn't even tell you what it was. I couldn't even tell you anything about that experience, hardly, outside of the fact that it happened. And so one of the things I realized was there's some really interesting data around this. I don't know. Do you know the data around like what we worry about actually happens? What percentage of those things?
It's like less than 5. It's crazy.
85% never come true ever.
Okay, 15.
Well, right. And of the 15%, I think it's either 85 or 87% of those things that actually happen, we're totally capable of dealing with. So the real numbers, like 4% of things that happen really bad, and people like have a hard time dealing with them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like 96% of things that you worry about either don't happen or you're like totally handle it when it happens.
Right.
You
Right.
know? And it's 8.5 out of 10 never happen. So what's funny is like those that actually do happen, there's like an 8.5 out of 10 chance that you're cool with you just manage through it. So, but we sit here and worry. Life is what happens when we worry about things that are never going to happen. There's like this interesting quote I think Mark Twain said about it, but it's funny to see that people layer these things through their subconscious, and then it becomes this like wall of doubt, of like what I am, wall of this is my life and it's not going to change. And I wish it was on the thing on the other side of the wall. So how do you deconstruct that for people that you work with?
Yeah. And just to shed like one of my own beliefs on this too, I think everybody moves through this process differently. For some people, it can be like you go to a live event and all your stuff, you just clear all your stuff and you see life completely different moving forward. You read a book and you're like, oh my gosh, okay, I have what I need. For some people, myself included in this, like I really needed to work through some of my own thoughts and beliefs that were not serving me. So a lot of what I do with people is what I learned through the own growth that I went through with mentors and coaching and all that, is to really identify how the belief system, it's almost like a science experiment. Like we're looking at, okay, this is the belief system and this is how it's directly correlating to your behavior right now. And this is how it's showing up in your business. So if you can see, this is where it comes from, this is what you're doing, this is what it's limiting, you can start to unravel and recreate a new belief system that looks more like this is now what you believe without all the noise. This is the new behavior. This is the new results. Does that make sense?
That makes total sense. I love that. And it's like, it's so easy. Why don't we all just do it?
Right. Well, and that's what I mean. Like for some people, it really like some people don't need to hire someone to work with them on this stuff. Some people do. And I think it all starts with awareness. Until we actually have awareness of self and awareness of some of these patterns and curiosity, I think it comes with curiosity too, we can't really get anywhere.
Yeah, and I think some of it, to your point, has to do with the people's sensitivity and neurology and psychology, right? Because I know people that are like, and I think, look, majority of the world is just fucking asleep at the wheel. They're just like,
I mean, most of us are living unconsciously.
Yeah. Like we're just like, boop, turn it off. I'm gonna stay asleep. Every now and again, we wake up and people deal with these like midlife crises, or they deal with these like massive changes because, and then they either embrace the change or go and do the work, or they run back into to hibernation. They go, oh, I'm going back to sleep.
Yes.
And it comes out sideways in its own fucked up weird ways, and everyone around them has their issues with it, and they just either ignore it or deal with it or somewhere in between, right?
And then they replay that same thing 5-10 years from now, and they don't even connect the dots.
and then they die, you know, and it's a story that people forget and they never tell, right? And so and the reality is, I had this realization when I was pretty young, and you said something a moment ago. One of my mentors said, with awareness comes choice, right? This is his, with awareness comes choice. So I have, I started doing a lot of work around my own consciousness and my own life and trauma, just especially in the last couple of years, like to a point where it's like, it's this massive thing for me now. But I came up with this formula I want to run by you. Are you game?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I love playing.
All right. So check this out. So I was trying to promote my book, which I always try to promote, but like especially when it was launching, and I'm like, man, I got to get on a bunch of podcasts, and I had zero social currency in the digital world, a ton of social currency in the analog world. I'm serious, like none, like.
I know some of the people you spend time with.
I know. I'm saying that's all new. That's all. Okay. That's all in the last it's less than 12 months. Like, so my digital social currency was very minimal, like even 10 months ago. But I'm me, and I'm a good relationship builder. I'm a heavy influencer, and I have a lot of
Pink unicorn who
And
will
I'm all about pink
for
unicorn.
himself. Yes.
Dude, my pink unicorn is one of my personal mascots. So I go out there, I bust out the pink unicorn, and it attracts people. Like people like it because it's interesting, and that's just me being me. And so I was like, man, I got to get on these shows, and I don't really have like I'm not Gary Vee yet, like. I have I know I have a dynamic personality that is attractive to people because it has been in my businesses, and it's one of my like gifts that I lean on hard. And so I was like, how do I? And I was like, oh. And so I started writing these people, and I'm like, hey, I love your podcast. I want to be on it. I'd love to share with you my fulfillment formula. So then I'd write ST plus CV in parentheses, the open parenthesis, ST plus CV, close parenthesis, / which is division, divided by NEDS.
NEDS?
So M like Mary, E like elephant, D like David, S like Sam. So ST plus CV divided by meds. And I realized it's a formula that part of it I R&D it. I ripped off part of it from different people, but it's something. Yeah, some of it's me.
That's your brutal honesty. Here's the truth.
Well, so ST stands for strengths, which is Gallup's tool. It's a tool that I use. I didn't create that. And CV is core values. So your strengths plus your core values divided by your meds. And meds is a friend of mine, Marco Gargenta, is who I learned this from. Stands for mindfulness, exercise, diet, and sleep. And so the fulfillment formula, I use it actually with my CEO coaching, is I have them rank themselves on a 1 through 10. We figure out their top 5 strengths, their talents, and we say, how well did you live in your strengths this week on a scale of 1 to 10, each strength. And then we add to that, how well did you live in your top 5 values for the week? And then we divide that by meds, and we rank each one of those on a scale of 1 to 10. Do you have a mindfulness practice? Did you do it consistently? How would you rate that on a scale of 1 to 10? Exercise. Did you exercise like consistently? How would you rate that on a scale of 1 to 10? Diet. How well did you eat on a scale of 1 to 10? And sleep. How well did you sleep on a scale of 1 to 10? So the idea being, if I'm working in my talents, living in my strengths, and doing it with a high level of healthy awareness, which meds is around awareness, right? Like, you need good sleep. I need to feed my body. I need to like go and exercise.
Meds to keep you from having to take meds.
Yeah, right. So my fulfillment formula is that. I wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
I love that, because what you're doing is you're bringing conscious awareness to the behaviors that people are consistently taking every single day, or the decisions that they're making every single day. And that's what a lot of this is. We don't realize what it is that we're actually doing. So how can we change it?
Totally. I think most people are asleep, and you see it. And like, I'll sometimes have these conversations with people, and like, this is probably one of the best conversations I've had on this topic. So I thank you for that. I appreciate you for that.
Thank you for having me on. I love talking with you.
Yeah. It's so fun. I'll talk to people, and they'll look at me and their eyes will glaze over. I have clients, I make them do a recentering before we like start, which is deep breaths. Right. And I have people that are so out of touch with themselves.
They're not in their body.
They won't do it. They refuse to do it with me. And I'm like, dude, it's 30 seconds. Like, and then I just bully them. I go, well, you have to do it if you want me to coach you.
Well, the thing about it is too, there's so much science behind this. You are in fight or flight when you're not in a neutral state. And when you're in fight or flight, you're not making good decisions. You're making fight or flight decisions, and you don't need to be. Lions and bears are not chasing you right now. You're under the roof of your home or your office or whatever it may be. You don't need to be in that anxious state. But by these simple practices and what you're talking about, and paying attention to mindfulness and rest and exercise and sleep, along with your strengths and your core values, you are basically catapulting, hey, how do we operate out of fight or flight on a consistent basis?
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it from that standpoint. For me, it was just one of those things where I'm like, I noticed that if I'm not working in my talents, I get like really disengaged, right? Which is that's what Gallup says, and it's true. And if I'm living out of my values, I feel friction, and it creates anxiety, and it creates neuroses and these like loops of wonder and worry, right? Absolutely. So, right, and like you know it, right? Yeah, like whenever, like I know it because I consistently test the boundaries of my values all the time. Yeah. What's that?
What do you mean by that?
Well, less now. Now I'm leaning more into them, but just when I was unconscious of my.
Okay, so this is not consciously testing the boundaries of your values.
When I was, No, I know I'm going against my values. Like
Okay.
there's a clear, like, this is like drug addicts behavior type stuff. Not necessarily with drugs, but just drug addict behavior.
No, you're out of integrity.
Yeah, I know I'm out of integrity, but I want to go do it, so I do it.
Yeah.
And so when I was younger, I would just know that I was doing that and I didn't care. I was like, this is like, essentially it was, I want to go and party and I want to go and, fuck off and do these things that I'm not going to go into detail of what they are, but there are things that like there are things that I would not do now, and they were coming from a place of trauma, right?
Oh, me too.
So human beings do this, right? We have these deep traumas, and then they make us feel like I'll give you an example. Like, let's use the example of people want to feel like everyone accepts them, right? Mm-hmm. They want to feel empowered through winning people. For me, my number 3 stance woo, which is winning others over. A lot of that's around like, I want people to give me the shot in the arm that I'm valuable, right? So there's a lot of different ways woo can manifest itself. In business, right. It's really valuable. I can win sales. I can get talent to come join me. I can win accounts. I can win over an influencer to like promote me, right? Those are fairly healthy manifestations of woo. An unhealthy manifestation of woo would be if you were like trying to, get like someone to essentially give you validation of your worth just for the sake of that by itself. And
when it's not in their best interest. Actually, it goes back to what we were talking about with coaching and ethics. When you're trying to validate your own self-worth by saying this person got this result, but you did it in a way that it wasn't the best and most healthy way to deliver it.
Yeah, like I would do that, or like I would go like, wife, kids, I go out partying in Vegas with my friends for the weekend and like just be a fucking maniac, right? And my wife knows it. She's like, knows that I still am a maniac, but I would just go and do that with my friends. And it's like, that's not really being a good dad. Sorry. That's not in the service of my family, and which is, by the way, like one of my number one values is around like having a great family, right? So that's actually probably the best example I have, is I would do these things that were not in service of me having a great family consistently. And consistently, like twice a year or once a year or whatever, which some people are like, they would never do it, right? Because they're like, this is not in the service of what I really want, which is to have a great family. Or I would travel a lot for my business, right? So I traveled 192 days, and that included family travel too, but that was probably 2/3 of that was business travel in the year 2018. Is that in the service of having a great relationship with my, at that point, 3 years ago, I had an 8-year-old and a 4-year-old. Is that in the service of me having a great relationship, a great family? Absolutely not. But I was indulging in this thing of like wanting to feel validated by the size of my business, right? Yep. These are actually my best examples.
We do this stuff. We do this stuff all the time. We don't have boundaries with our time. We don't step away from the computer when the evening rolls in. We don't stop working because we've tied up our identity into the worthiness, quote unquote, that our business success brings us. And so these subconscious behaviors create this pattern of overwhelm and chaos and blah, 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 that's not actually elevating us or anybody around us, our family members, our team members, our peers, whatever that may be, whatever your inner circle looks like, because we're letting these unconscious thoughts and limiting beliefs basically play on autopilot without without having the awareness that it's happening, or B, having the awareness, because this happens all the time too, having the awareness, but not knowing how to change it.
Yeah, I would just say like, fuck it. That was my answer. I swear to God, it was always fuck it. I'll just deal with it later. And I would just go do what I wanted to do and get my shot in the arm of whatever it is that I was trying to feed myself for at the moment. And then I deal with the repercussions.
Right.
Which and that has a shelf life with your team, with your family, with your loved ones. And I just happen to be smart. I married a super patient person who, like, I always jokingly said, I'm like, I would have
beautiful branding and packaging. Shout out.
Oh yeah, amazing. My wife Mariah is this fucking amazing person, and I always said, I'm like, dude, I would have left me years ago if I was you. I you know, I'm happy she didn't, you know, but it's interesting to see that get unpacked. And so when someone comes to you, and I know we're kind of rounding the bend here on the show, when someone comes to you, how do you, like, and some of this stuff is deep psychology, and I know you're not a psychologist, so I don't expect that to be the resolution. But when someone comes to you and like, how do they work with you so that they can get what they want?
Yep. Great question. Go to the root. So my job becomes, I need to help them understand the root of where this started and how it's played out. And a lot of times we're talking about the body a lot, which I love that you do, because you are somebody that incorporates like body senses and feelings so much into just like how you show up. A lot of this too is our body is storing these emotions and this trauma and this fear or anger or low level thoughts and feelings. We haven't processed it and moved it out of our system and out of our energy. So we are constantly carrying around this anxiety that we don't even realize is there. So my job basically is help people understand how they're actually seeing things that's leading them to the behaviors that's happening. And a lot of times, you know, just to be completely candid and honest, a lot of times it is stuff that happened at home, or it is a scenario of, oh, well, I created a behavior or a belief that when I achieved things in life, when I was a kid, when I would get an A+, or when I would get the award or first pick or whatever, that's when I would receive love and respect and appreciation from my parents. And so what I did is I created this belief that I always have to be number one. I have to be outperforming everyone. I have to be making as much money as possible, because that's how I experience worthiness. And the thing is it doesn't matter what happened. Everybody has different levels of stuff. That, to some people, doesn't sound like trauma. When we think about trauma, we think about like really bad things that could have happened to you in your life. That doesn't sound like trauma. But rejection is still trauma. And we create beliefs about ourselves through it. And a lot of times we don't really have awareness to what it is that we do believe about ourselves.
Yeah. Wow. It's funny. I was thinking that earlier in the show, I'm glad you said it, which is because I do agree. I think when people say the word trauma, they're like, oh, like you were heavily abused. And,
yes.
And for
the assumption. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of people, that is that, you know, you know, there's some level of abuse or generational abuse, or, you know, parents are alcoholics or whatever. Right. And that stuff's like that's more like, yeah, no fucking shit. Like that creates trauma. That's the obvious stuff. But to your point, there's less obvious. There's a lot like, the biggest lie that I now know what it is, which is funny.
Did you remember?
Is that I'm super, like, it's all self-aggression, that I was abusing, very abusive to myself. That was my realization, was that I thought that it's funny. I forget stuff in the service of protecting myself. But for me, it was that I had convinced myself that was there to help me, like, be better. Right. Right. Like, oh, well, dude, if you have that internal, that fire to protect yourself, that fire to achieve, that fire to accomplish, like, you, like, getting pissed, like really pissed when you're not where you want to be in life, that's all good. That's in the service of you, which in some ways it is. Like, there's a warrior. Jeff Spencer is my coach, so you know Jeff.
Yes, he's amazing.
Yeah, Jeff is my coach. Okay, so Jeff and I have talked about this, and he's like, dude, you're like he calls me an artist warrior. But I have a warrior spirit. Like, I am a kind person, but I have hardcore warrior spirit. Like, and I know it, and I've always had it. But one of the things that he and I were talking about was, and actually with my therapist was, which is not him, which was that there is having a warrior spirit, and then there's a part where you're being essentially super self-aggressive, where you're, and the word I'm going to use, because I was working with another guy who I think I should introduce you to him, Nathaniel. Have you ever heard of him?
I haven't, but love to know him.
Oh, Nathaniel, if you're listening, I'm going to make an introduction for you. So Nathaniel does Byron Katie's shadow work.
Oh yeah.
Right. So he and I did. How this came to be was somatic. Dude, I'm such a nut for all this stuff.
That's why I was so excited when I saw this on my calendar this morning or earlier this week. I was just like, yes, I can't wait to talk to Darius on Friday.
Oh, likewise. I'm a learner. It's my number 4 strength. So I'm a learner, and I'm like into a lot of this stuff. And so Nathaniel offered to do a free session for me just because I refer a lot of coaches out to people. Mm-hmm. And so we did shadow work, and my end result was through my trauma life, I have become my biggest abuser, self-abuser, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. And then I lied to myself and said that was there that I was protecting myself to be a better version of myself, when in fact, all it was doing was punishing myself.
Yes. People do this without even realizing they're doing it. And how much lighter can it be? I had lied to myself that I was my biggest protector when I was my biggest abuser. And that's fucked up. That's a fucked up realization when you're because you create these villains in your head, oh, my dad was an asshole, or oh, my mom was a jerk to me, or oh, this person, my girlfriend did me wrong, or whatever, right? We create these fake villains, and then we go, fuck that person. I'll show them, right? But the self-abuser is the person that says, fuck that person, I'll show them. That's you. Yep. It's the drama triangle. Have you ever heard of the drama triangle? Yeah. The power of Ted, mm-hmm. the empowerment dynamic. Yeah. That's the persecutor, right? Yes. So I try to be a creator, but I'm often the persecutor. Yeah, I mean, we all have our things, but it's that awareness to it that shifts it. And I think what's so empowering to me about this work is that then we get, and you just talked about how Jeff helped you make that shift. Then we get to go, well, what does that mean about me if I'm not my own abuser? What do I get to be? What do I get to become? Which is where the brilliance really happens. That's where the transformation is. So this thing that we might be doing to ourselves that's not serving us, when we polarize it, when we flip it to the other side, what's possible? Yeah, which is really cool, right? And the other thing because this is I think I did the work with Nathaniel in the fall. So this was a big epiphany, and then it really hammered home because I was in one of my CEO forums, and I kept using language. This is amazing because it all goes full circle. My mm-hmm. book is about how your values become the language of accountability in your life. Yes. And I was using some very harsh language about myself, in a self-deprecating way, and I brought it up to my therapist, and he's I still saw the look on his face over Zoom. And he's an amazing somatic experience therapist, and he knows all my stories. So he's has this look in his face, and I see it, and I'm like, why does Steven look appalled right now? Uh-huh. Appalled, like he couldn't believe what I was saying, and I'm saying it yeah, man, that's just how it is. And he's right. And he's hold on. It wasn't even hold on. It was horrified by what I was saying. He couldn't believe that it was something I admitted that I was just yeah, man, I always make self-deprecating humor about myself, and in my forum they kept on saying, hey, you keep saying these really harsh things about yourself, and I'm no, man, I'm just being self-deprecating. And he said something that I thought was really amazing, talking about subconscious and conscious. He's listen, Darius, your subconscious brain does not know what sarcasm is, right? It does not have a capacity, and we know this, the reptilian brain does not have a capacity for language, right? The back of your brain, the part that controls decision making, no capacity for language at all. That's why we get that gut feeling to do stuff, right? This comes through all these the neural cortex, grabbing all these things and coming up through the subconscious, and then we decide, right? And so he's you have to stop doing that. You cannot make self-deprecating humor. You cannot do it. You know what I don't have the answer to, but where I've thought before, because of how powerful the brain is, This might be a little out there, but sometimes I'm like, when you watch TV and you see people going through like tragedy or war or crazy, crazy stuff, what are we doing to ourselves? And I don't think we need to like not watch TV. Like we watch TV in my family, but that's just something I've been thinking about recently because of what you just said. Everything that we say to ourselves goes straight in.
Wow. Well, so this is where I'm going to let us wrap the show up because I'm about to admit something that only people that know me really know because I always say this is I like the most violent, fucked up, gratuitous TV there is. Like heavy sex, heavy violence, heavy drugs. I'm in. Right. I swear to God, I'm rewatching season 1 of Sopranos right now.
You don't even want to think about what I just put out there. You're like,
yeah, no, you just fucked me up. I'm like literally binge watching Sopranos and like when those shows some fucked up murder, I'm like, this is amazing.
It's so weird though, isn't it? Because it's like, does it know it's not really us? Like, how do we consciously separate ourselves from that?
Well, then the question is, why am I attracted to it? Like it's
right.
like I'm telling you, Game of Thrones, Sopranos, Breaking Bad. I'm going down the list of my favorite TV shows. They all have something in common: heavy drugs, heavy sex, heavy fucked up story. I mean, they're great stories. Don't get me wrong. Lots of violence.
Watching more television with your kids.
No, I don't watch any.
Watch tonight.
Yeah, no, me and the kids, we watch Voltron. Cartoons. Well, hey, listen, I'd love to have you promote where people can find you. And man, this has been such a kill. I always stop the show at an hour. I'm like, fuck it, I'm letting this thing run.
Yeah, no, thank you. It doesn't feel like work when it's this fun. It just feels like play, and that's what life's supposed to be like. Abundantly Clear podcast is the quickest way to get to my website, and I do blind spot assessments with people. So if you're someone that's been listening to this and is kind of wondering, maybe I'm not seeing some patterns that I'm feeling like I need to do further exploration on, I'd love to do that with you. And thank you so much for having me again. This was awesome.
Oh my gosh, the pleasure was mine. Stay on for a second when I'm going to wrap the show up. Is that cool?
Okay. Yes.
Guys, what an amazing show. I love what we just did, Malorie and Nicole. This has been like, just made my day. I feel so, to your point, this feels like play. Guys, what an amazing show. Check out Malorie and all the Abundantly Clear podcast. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Check out our podcast, and we'll put this in the comments and in the show notes when we release the show. So guys, check her out. Support her, do the blind spot assessment. I have people I'm going to send your way. This is so cool. And guys, I have a makeup show this afternoon. We're doing Angela Poli because that show got canceled. So if you're around and you're watching this, check us out. We'll be doing the Angela Poli show. With that said, guys, thank you so much for listening and watching. We love you so much. Peace. We're out of here, guys.